Preparing to go live. All right, welcome to another edition of New Wine Uncorked, and we are stoked that you're joining us this day, this Friday, once again, because, well, that's pretty much the consistency for us, is that when we do record and when we do go live, it's Friday. Also, another consistency for the four of us, if you asked us individually or corporately or paired us off or whatever combination you got, is that Jesus is a consistency, consistent in each one of our lives. And that's what the stability and the foundation comes for us. And that's New Wine Uncorked is part of New Wine Skins, whose consistency is Jesus Christ. We talk about at New Wine about building relational bridges in Christ through the Spirit in contemporary culture. Meaning what? Meaning that there's this group of people who follow this guy who some 2,000 years ago not only lived on the earth, but in the span of 3.5 years shook things up enough to where he was able to irritate, offend, and anger enough people to get himself nailed to a tree, ridiculed, publicly mocked, and massacred and killed, cut down, only to 3 days later come back to life. Some would argue that he never left life. He was killed. And so what we think about death, his body was laid in the earth. And so 3 days later, the life that he came to give to each one of us as humans, we see this resurrected life. And so there's this book called the Bible that we continue to talk about, right? And a number of writers in there. And one writer, Apostle Paul, says that the resurrection, the raising of the dead of Jesus Christ, is foundational. It's crux to the meaning of what it means to be a follower of Christ, because we believe that death here on earth is not the final say. And so there's this group of people called the church, living out this truth, right? This resurrected truth, this hope. And we've been talking about, last week we talked about to live as Christ. And what does this look like? And we want to continue this trajectory as to the group of people called the church, the Greek word ekklesia, the community of believers. I teach at Multnomah University, and part of our motto this year is we believe. We believe is a wonderful statement. However, it's an empty statement if we don't know what we believe in, or for Christians, who is it that is center to our faith. And so today we want to continue this discussion. We've got pastors and academics and professors, and we work and minister in different realms, the four of us do. And yet again, going back to the consistency that we all have, his name is Jesus Christ. And so we're talking today, what does that look like? The consistency of these people following Christ, the church, the living truth of what? What is the church today? And is she who she's meant to be? And that includes each one of us. And so we're stoked that you're joining us. Feel free to enter into the discussion through the comments on the right-hand side there, for those of you catching us live on YouTube, because every Friday we do that. And for those of you watching the recording at a later time, you can also actually comment still in the comment section, the chat section, or feel free to go to new-wineskins.org and contact us. We have a little section there that says get involved. Feel free to contact us, and then that way we'll invite you and we'll tell you some of the things that are going on. We have a retreat coming up in October for New Wine Skins, a beautiful retreat. In fact, you see that dude right there with the beautiful haircut, Friday ritual. He's actually the keynote speaker for this retreat on story. We all have a story. And so that's what we're talking about today, though, the story of the church and how we all fit into that. And so we're stoked that you're joining us. So who is the church? And is she living out her call in today's culture? If we say Christian church, do people know what we're talking about?
Okay, so I need to correct you, Matt. So when they signed me up for this whole thing, I mean, you know what? When they signed me up for this whole thing, I was not considered the keynote speaker. I was considered, hey, would you like just kind of do this? And they had my name in this one space. and there was a question mark by it, right? And so then I said, yeah, sure, I guess I'll do that. And then and so I did it, and then one thing led to another, and then the next thing I know is that, like, the description I gave, which I thought was supposed to be a smaller blurb, they said, no, we need a bigger blurb. So then I make a bigger blurb, and then all of a sudden, the next thing I know, it's like, that's like the thing on the brochure.
You are the
right?
keynote speaker.
You know what, though? But no, I'm not. So here's the deal, right? I mean, we're talking about the church, and I think, when we think of the church, it's a community, right? It's a community of believers, everybody participating. And so, when we go to church, we think, oh yeah, the pastor's supposed to speak, but it's not, I mean, sure. To a certain extent, we facilitate, we discuss. I mean, there is a responsibility in pastoring and shepherding, but really the body is everybody's contribution, everybody's story, and ministry to one another. And so, in a way, even that mindset is like, I'm not the keynote speaker. I mean, I'm hopefully just giving opportunities to help people learn how to share your story, right? I mean, that's what the whole time is about. But we don't know how to share stories. We're not sure about our story. We don't value our story, and other people's stories are valued. And so when Jesus comes down, when everybody's saying, "Oh yeah, we're writing them off. He's just a friend of sinners, prostitutes, tax collectors," and the list goes on. But Jesus comes down and says, "No, you know what? Your story is valuable, right? I mean, the woman at the well, it's like, you know what? She comes down, she kind of is like, has this conversation with Jesus, and then Jesus, she's a little apprehensive. We know her story is rejected by everybody in the village because that's why she's getting water by herself. Then Jesus has a conversation with her, brings out the truth. But you know what? Her story's valuable. I mean, she lives this
absolutely
crappy life. She lives this broken life. She can't, stay married, or she has to get out of marriage because of abuse. But Jesus helps her with her story, and Jesus becomes her story. So she runs into the village, says, "Hey, I've got a story for you. Guess who I saw?" And then they're like, "Holy shnikes!" And they come out, and then they're like talking with Jesus. But isn't it great that they kind of look to her finally? And they say, "Okay, you know what? You might have gotten us out here, but now we get to hear the rest of the story." And so, I guess that's really what the church is about, right? It's about to realize, hey, my story is valuable, and so. Bringing people together, but really that's what the conference is about. It's about what Jesus did, is to say, you know what, your story is valuable. And so because we've done some things, and each of us on our own part, we're accomplished certain things, but our story's not any more important than anybody else's, is it? I mean, so I am not the keynote speaker. I am the person that hopefully just helps people to kind of get the discussion and ask the question, and help people realize, my story is valuable. Phil, Kayla, Matt's story is valuable. And how do we listen to it without having to judge that person and go, no, that doesn't really happen. So I want to just jump in and say, I am not the keynote speaker. I am just hopefully, everybody has a story. And really, it's just to kind of help people to see, help people to realize my story is valuable. Isn't that what Jesus did? He just came down and he says, you know what, you have a valuable story. It even makes it more valuable and Jesus says, I want to be part of your story. And so that's really what the bottom line of the church is people sharing their stories together and working towards that common good. So sorry to correct you in front of everybody. I mean, I respect you, but I'm not the keynote speaker. I just want to make that clear. So yeah,
I can't tell if that's a form of what do they call that? Christian humility, or what do they call that? Deflection. So I'm not, or if it's invitation. But I appreciate it, actually, Jim, the fact that you're highlighting that we're all the keynote speaker when it talks about telling our story, right?
Because they never asked me to be the keynote speaker. So that's why. So it's not this humility. It's like, okay, I'll do this. It's, all I knew is that, CJ and Trudy invited me to help them get going with this. And so that's why I say what I said. So.
And in good Christian fashion, though, pushing away the spotlight, but this is the cool thing about New Wine Skins, and how the church is supposed to be, is there's supposed to be fun in it. And so, Jim and I can go back and forth and joke about it and stuff. And the truth is that that's only because of the community, right? There's a level of respect and trust and love there that I appreciate the fact that you are leading, Jim, but you're leading corporately in togetherness, and so um, the truth is that the church has a multitude of keynote speakers that unfortunately though have been drained from their understanding that they are indeed the keynote, that in fact your story does actually matter. And it's so trippy to me. I can't even remember if it's actually a dude that I work with, Professor Alvarado at Multnomah. And, my family has this saying, we love you crazy, insane Jesus love. And Ruben, Professor Alvarado is super intrigued by that. And one day we're just sitting there and he says, dude, isn't it odd? Have you ever thought about it that there on the cross when he was just getting crushed, he was sitting there thinking, dude, Matt, I'm crazy, insane, in love with you. Like totally, and he was there sitting excited for when the time that we get to meet face to face. And Ruben was saying, isn't it trippy how he's going to be like, when he embraces you and is like, dude, so what was the last tattoo that you got before, like, even though he knows, it's like the father asking Adam and Eve, where are you? He knows where they are, right? But so when I get there and Jesus is asking me, so which tattoo did you really like that kind of like intimacy? Because why? Because my story does matter to Jesus, the grand storyteller. And he tells us that story matters by incarnating his own story so that we can do the same, right? So that we can become part of his. Why, though, does the church so downplay or forget the profundity, the beautiful truth of our story? Like, what detracts it? Like, what takes away from that, do you think?
Yeah, man, that's a good way to frame that question. There's a couple of things that come to mind right off the bat. If I wanted to be negative, I'd want to say that we want to wear the Christian mask or the Christendom mask. And it's almost the phrase that I know we've all heard, especially as a preacher's getting ready to speak, hide me behind the cross. It's like, well, no, I want to see how you got to the cross. I want to hear how your story connected. But the same token, there's probably some other non-malicious ways to look at this. We can have some shame behind our stories that we just don't want other people to see. It's not necessarily that we want to hide behind the mask, maybe, but there's still some sense that we're nervous about how is someone going to hear my story? What does someone want to hear? And very often, I think we kind of get caught up with information where we want the information, we want the product, we want what's the good thing. How does my church grow? Show me, don't tell me about the birth pains, just give me the baby kind of thing. And so we want the content. We don't always want to hear the story. And so, yeah, thinking of your analogy of, yeah, Jesus meeting you and wanting to say, hey, ask you about the last tattoo, even though he knows he wants the story. And so that becomes a thing too. Do we want to hear people's story, or do we want to just hear that you're a Christian? And then what are the beliefs that you have in relation to it? Or do we want to hear how'd you find the cross? I think of the times when I see communion done and everyone goes and takes a piece of the bread. I always sit back and watch everyone come from across the room to take that piece of the bread, and always think that no matter where we came from, where Jesus was available to us. And all of us in that room that are followers took a piece of his life. Wherever we are, we go back with a piece of his body. And that always just amazes me, that no matter where we come from, no matter what it is, we all have that point of connection that brings us together. And even though we go back to our worlds, we all go back all in Christ and all united and all connected and the like. So, yeah.
Don't you think that's what messes it up for a lot of people? Is that in-depth connection that's immediate right there, that when we let go, that the Spirit of God actually draws us in. There's nothing that we need to do other than really being who we are, right? Like Jesus doesn't have this expectation that we must, and this is the trippy part, is is we don't even need to belong to the family of God before we believe the truth of the family of God, or that we actually are blessed by the family of God, and Jesus actually is, oh man, the technology stuff, but when I use metaphors, analogies, anecdotes from technology, but the Amazon try it for free before you buy stuff, Jesus is so cool with who he is. He's like, dude, try me on, try it. He is so confident. He will put his stuff up against any and every, I think it was last week, or I don't even remember. I'm hanging out with Jim too much. Maybe it was at a lunch that we were having, but he, like, how do you discuss truth, like your truth with people? And I love sitting down and asking folks about, well, what is it, the truth that you live by? Because I have this same confidence that I watched with Jesus throughout the gospel narratives, the gospel story. He is so confident in this divine love that he is like, come, every single one of you, there's not one of you who can bring anything to me where I'm going to be like, oof, yeah, that's a tough one. I'm gonna have to figure out how I'm gonna love you, and ooh, that's a good one. That's a good problem, because that really does separate you from me and my love. Paul goes so far as to say nothing created, and I just don't know who can show me anything that's a substance of uncreation. No one can bring a person to me. Even AI and everything that comes from technology, it's all created from us. And Paul, the Apostle Paul, says nothing created can separate you from this love. When you're talking about that, Phil, about the truth of Jesus and this presence, I've hung out with a lot of people who put the label of Christian on themselves, and I'm not sure they believe what you just said. That Jesus is present and that love is so real.
And I think that's part of the question. I think having that, knowing, how do I say this? How do I say this? We have these beliefs that we call Christian, but I don't know if we know what we actually believe at times, or at least we don't live out what's in the text. We don't live out what Jesus did. At least we do in part, but there's so much more that we all need to learn and understand as Christians, each and every one of us, no matter what letters are or are not behind our names. We still there's so much growing that we all need to do, and this understanding and being able to live, having the confidence enough to live into the values that we want to hold as Christians. So yeah.
I think too, the more that we dive into Jesus, the more that we're going to be convicted to continue to live that out, and that's inconvenient. Like relationships are inconvenient. Interacting with people, building those relationships, it's inconvenient. It requires your time and energy, and you're probably going to be uncomfortable because you're going to have to step outside of your comfort zone at some point in the relationship. You're going to have to put yourself out there if you really want to have that deep, intimate connection with someone. On any level, to really get to know someone, like Jesus says with us, like, hey, I want to know your story. You have to be willing to sit down and listen, and that takes time. And that's, I think, one of the things that we struggle the most with in our society is time, being willing to give our time, because we live in such a fast-paced culture that just wants to go, go, go. And like you said, Phil, we just want the product. Just get, that's great. Just, I don't care. We have, trailers for everything. We have advertisements. We have advertisements now that we can skip 5 seconds into it. And so now you only get the 5 seconds, right? Like before the videos. And we can play videos now on 2 times the speed, because why would I sit here and watch 10 minutes of a video when I can spend only 5, right? It's so much of a go, go, go consume in the way that's most convenient for me, with, the best outcome possible, the most comfortable, where I have to do the least amount of work. It's what every teacher, I'm sure, says they hear at the beginning of every single year. Hey, what's the least that I can do to get the best grade in your class? What's the minimum that I can do? Well, if you want the A, it's not the minimum, but that's how we live. And I think that's how we also live with our faith, unfortunately. And so are we really diving into Jesus fully? Are we? Because that's uncomfortable to do. That's inconvenient to do. And when we do that, then we are continuously inconveniencing ourselves, because we have to allow the Spirit to work in our lives, and he's going to keep convicting us to continuously live for him and go out and share the gospel. And that is uncomfortable.
And yeah, keeping with that same note, thinking of, okay, what do I need to believe in order to be a Christian? Better yet, what do I need to believe in order to go to heaven? Just tell me, flatline, what I need to do. It's like, well, no, you gotta become a Christian. You have to grow into faith. And I don't know if we answer the question that way, but it takes a lot of time. Thinking of building churches. So Jim, doing multi-ethnic work in just multi-ethnic communities and bringing very different people together to turn into one, place. That takes so much time to build. We're not going to just do that in 3 years. You're not going to do that in 5 years, but it's going to take time to learn the stories and to learn, how we fit together and what we appreciate, and learn about one another and work through some of the challenges. We talk about New Wine about working through our differences rather than working around them. That takes time to gain the respect and love for someone else that you don't know, in order to respect opinions that differ or even combative to you. So yeah, all the stuff that we're talking about, Kaylee, you're absolutely right. All the stuff we're talking about is going to take time, and we just have to know that it's going to make us uncomfortable. It's going to be inconvenient, all those kind of things. But this is what we are.
So, Matt, when your family came over, mine was your daughter. We had a terrible time with that, Jaquel. I know it would have been a perfect time if you were singing at the table with us. But, I just really it's fun listening to people like you and your son talking philosophy. I mean, that's like a totally different level for me, right? I mean, and it's so, the names and the people that have, philosophers that have spoken about truth over the generations. I mean, I think that truth has been discussed. What is truth? I mean, that's kind of the big question. And so even within the Christian faith, it's like, what is truth? And so it becomes a discussion. But what I think it is, kind of like what Phil brought up, even with belief, right? Truth, belief, faith. We talk about it, right? Tell me what it is to get there. And we talk about, oh yeah, this is what I believe, right? But I think really, truth is our experiences. I mean, truth is an activity. Truth is, when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I mean, there is motion there is activity involved. And so I know, like within my own culture, and also even within the Native American culture, don't tell me what you believe. I know what you believe because I can see what you believe, right? And so I think that becomes, we're the Western culture, we're really ready to explain, hey, this is what I believe. But it's like, you know what? I can tell what you believe by what you do, right? And so, I think that's the same with truth, right? I mean, is Jesus really love? I mean, do we really believe that he loves us unconditionally? Well, let's see how that plays out in your life. So I think maybe the challenge really isn't the discussion about it, but it's like, and I think with the stories, it's how truth plays out in my life, right? I mean, the woman goes back and says to everybody, the truth is that he just told me everything I know about myself, And so it's that truth of who Jesus is that curious, because he's speaking truth into her life, and and even with his truth, he still loves her, right? I mean, in spite of knowing all that stuff, he still has this conversation with her. So I think really, Jesus could have talked all about truth, but he showed the truth with her. I mean, he showed her, for some reason she felt accepted. She felt enough to go back and say, hey, you know what? I think this guy you guys need to meet. So, maybe that's the challenge for us, is that, are we living out the truth? I mean, are we willing to live out what we believe instead of discussing what we believe? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I think I mean, I dig the truth about truth. I mean, I dig when we start talking about truth. You know what I'm saying? About the fact that we have to have an understanding of what our truth is. And the problem is I think that we don't so often even wrestle with, well, what is that truth that I live by, that you're talking about, Jim? And so we don't understand then how every day the manifestations of my thought are my actions, and so we tend to have a disconnect between thought and act, and so talking about the philosophy and such, a lot of our discussions and dialogue, whether it's between me and my son or what we were having at that dinner, is, but what does that look like? What does it look like to have a connection between our thoughts and our actions, right? And is there a difference? Like, is there a distinguishing line between what my thoughts are and then what my acts are? And some philosophers have said our acts are our thoughts are our acts. You can't separate the two. Others have said, okay, well, because I am a thinking being, that's who I am. And so they've taken Descartes and they said, oh, I think, therefore I am. We are just thinking, we're rational beings, but that's not what even Descartes was saying, And so this idea of, yeah, are we thinking beings or are we acting beings? The truth is, for the Christian, is that both. We are what we do and we do who we are, right? But a lot of Christians separate. And so then they say one thing and they do another. And it's like, okay, well, then the disconnect is not within your heart. Your disconnect's not your words and your acts. Actually, it's your words and your heart understanding, because you're saying one thing, and that's not coming from your brain. A lot of us think it's just, distinguishing a difference between brain and heart. No, it's a division within us. Like, we are the ones divided. We're the ones confused. And so how do we overcome that?
And I want to, I think, I really enjoy listening to you and your son talk philosophy and talk, those, because I think those are important conversations to have. I think we do need to have those conversations, but it's almost like, and I know everybody hates sports analogies, but it's kind of like, you get in a huddle and you talk about the play. How long do you stay in the huddle, right? How long do you decide what play to run before you actually run the play? And so I think there are those times where you huddle, and we do need to discuss what truth is. And I think even more so, the most important question is, what did Jesus mean by truth, right? He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So what does it mean when Jesus says, I am the truth? And so what does that discussion look like? But I think you're right, though. I think the discussions are so important because, I don't think that, when I hear discussions, like philosophical discussions, it's kind of like going to a smorgasbord, right? And I'm guessing, not being a philosopher, that, there's just a lot. You're learning from one another. You're just, it's a constant learning and process and molding and shaping. But I think we do need to have the conversations. But I think the question becomes, okay, so when do we break the huddle and run the play? And that's in everything, right? If we're going to talk about missions, if we're going to talk about, loving, helping the poor, feeding and all that. How long do we talk about the huddle before we, break out and actually do it?
I have this one thought that keeps coming to mind often. So we know that what does Jesus say? You will be my witnesses, that phrase at the beginning of the book of Acts, right? And I always thought that in the same context of conversation where we're like, okay, we are what we think and we also are what we do, kind of thing. So much of what we've done has defined the church, and we have beliefs and we can spout the beliefs all we want, but what we've done has defined us in so many regard. So I'm wondering if Jesus had in mind, at least in some regard, that yeah, the witness will be what you guys do. You guys will you guys will determine the reputation of the church based on how you respond to me and to one another and the like, and that's going to shape the image and what the church is as we go forward. And so just thinking about that and just thinking of the different ways that we try to say, hey, scriptures say this, God's all about love, and then our actions so many different things. We almost wonder, like, okay, do we really believe what we say, or do we believe what we do? And it's almost like, yeah, that's we lean towards what we do, and without even thinking, taking in regard what we're actually supposed to be believing. So yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, we were talking about culture and everything, and I and belief. And so one of the things that Multnomah has had this they do these themes throughout the year, most universities and such, but it was we believe. And the question a lot of people said is, that's great, but what? You have to have it defining. In years ago, a heavyweight within the realm of faith, a guy named A.W. Tozer wrote that I do not recall, and this is years ago. He says, I do not recall another period when faith was as popular as it is today. If only we believe hard enough, we will make it somehow. So goes the popular chant. What you believe is not important. Only believe. What is overlooked, though, in all of this is that faith is only good when it engages truth. When it is made to rest upon falsehood, it can and often does lead to eternal tragedy. For it's not enough that we believe, we must believe the right thing about the right one. Culture today is about believing ideologies. Are you red? Are you blue? Are you pro this? Are you anti that? And Christianity says that's all well and good. I was preaching this weekend to a church, and they're talking about God's design for you and this. And I didn't get into specifically about what people think God's design is based on, gender and sexuality. I talked about the design that God has for us relationally, humanistically. He created the human, and yes, he created them male, female. So there is a design there, specifically gender, male, female. But he didn't intentionally create so that he could then create male, female. He created this being for relationship. And then when he realized that apart from him, Father relating to Adam, that Adam was still needing someone within the earthly realm, what does he do? He creates another. So clearly the design is not about our sexuality or even gender. It is primarily about this relationship with him meaning God the Father for Adam, right? And then that then is revealed further. What that looks like for the human is that it's not just relationship with one God, i.e. just this absolute God who is not triune, but actually when you're drawn into this relationship of Father with Father, that it's even more, and it's revealed to be Father, Son, and Spirit. And then we start to go, okay, wait, what? And that's the beautiful thing about this dialogue with this God, because this God says, yes, I know. When you start to unpack these concepts, if it's just nothing more than ideology, it's not going to make sense. And an ideology runs the gamut when it says, oh, well, you're requiring me to do this, this, and this. And that goes against my, like Kayla's talking about, my convenience, my comfort zone, such that, dude, if you think about it, if you took the human, the societal, I don't care what society is, go to whatever we think is the most loving and nicest and servanthood society. I don't care. Most people probably would not start in America. But to be honest, if you went to other countries, you're going to find, wait, Americans really aren't that mean. Okay. They're just like everyone else. However, what you will find in even the most generous of all countries, there comes a point where the generosity runs out if it's based on societal standards and such that someone like Kayla, we were talking about this last night, because since we've moved, the beautiful thing about technology is it allows for us to even still relate. Some could argue that we're not relating, whatever. We'll have that theology discussion on if FaceTime is relation. But every night now we get a chance to FaceTime. We have dinner with Chris and Kayla and Johanna, right? Over FaceTime. And we were talking last night how my wife and I were just remembering back when Kayla was a baby. And she had this little baby, Patty Beans. And we were just remarking last night how it's just kind of neat to see where we remember some 20 years ago where this little girl was holding her little baby, and today the reality is she really is holding her baby, and you see that love and everything. And yet, even in the midst of that absolute beauty, there are going to come times in this where Kayla has to actually make a decision to love this little child because it is inconvenient, it's uncomfortable. Kayla just doesn't feel like it, believe it or not, even though this little child is a gift. And that's where we go, okay, that's the paradox of the human, though, because we can look at that little baby that most of us would say, oh my gosh, how can anyone harm that little child? Well, guess what? There are people who willingly do. And they do. And so when we hear and see that, we go, wait, there's no way that this can be a creation of love, right? If this God is God of love, then how can people who are created in his image then be allowed to do this, right? And so that's why the dialogue has to happen, because maybe the unfortunate tragedy in each one of our lives is, and we are a comparative bunch of people. We compare everything. And in most of our lives, the comparison between when we see good and when we see evil or dark are not comparable. We see more and more of this one, the dark and the evil and stuff. I was talking with my daughter, and we were talking about on I can't, if it's on Discord, one of they're showing the trial of Christopher Chen, right? Horrible stuff that happened through the internet, right? And it makes you, and if you haven't heard it, it's a terrible story about abuse and people making fun and taking advantage of another person, another soul, right? And you see that kind of stuff. And there's like, and just the other day, I saw the anniversary of, or they were talking in court about some of the stuff going on with the civil rights and the marches and things, how that just gets so forgotten. And we read that and we go, wait, how can this be a God of love? Well, it can if folks who say that they're followers of the way are actually then following it by living it, right? Exactly what we were saying. Yet in my life, I allow those little hindrances to come in the way, How though does the church encourage us like to be positive? So is the negativity that you're talking about, Phil, doesn't always, it seems like when people talk about the church or Christianity, it's always negatives. Their interactions are always negative. Like, why is that we as Christians feel like our role in the church is not to be ministers of reconciliation, but to be pointer outers of wrong? I don't think that's a technical term, but
but it's the right term. That's the that's the idea. A couple of things come to mind. There are a couple of things where Jesus said some pretty harsh things, to just said some pretty harsh things. I come to bring a sword, those kind of things. But I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. First off, is that Jesus's harshest sayings were going to the religious leaders of his time that were taking people away or leading people into unfaithfulness. That was one of the major thoughts we should have. So really, when we think of, who Jesus would be harshest to, it would be us. Is that he would be more harshest to, and just saying, hey, you guys get your stuff together. But the same token that, we talk about the gospel being offensive. We talk about the gospel rubbing difficultly against sin in our lives and the like. And we think, man, I'm going to take that on personally. And I'm going to jump into life and say something crazy and be like sandpaper when, no, that's not what Jesus did to sinners. He invited them to a life to not sin anymore. Embrace his love. The story Jim brought up a moment ago. Embrace who he is. And then from that, go and sin no more. And that is like what we should be doing. Now, at the same token, that's not challenging sin. it's just challenging in a way that it invites you into the fellowship. It invites you to the party. So just as, when you explained just a moment ago about Trinitarian thought, Matt, where that's the thing. Our goal is to be inviting people to the Jesus party, the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit that began at the beginning of time, that Adam was invited to and decided to RSVP no and got kicked out. All now coming to the party. That's the point of this whole thing, is that we want to be in the same party with the same way John said our fellowship is with the Father. And so, yeah, man, that's what we want to do, invite people to the party and live into that. But yeah, if we feel like we have to point out people's sin, we're not inviting them to the party. We're telling them what they're doing wrong, when we need to come to the party in order to be healed from the sin that's in our lives. You don't get cleaned up first. You get cleaned up when you come to the party. So, yeah.
And I think the cool thing about the crazy insaneness, right, of Jesus, of his love, is that it is unconditional. And so even when we RSVP no, he doesn't love us any less, and he's not going to stop pursuing us. And that's the part that kind of blows our minds, because we like to answer for people. We're like, yeah, well, you probably can't come anyway, so just, it's fine. But he's like, hey, I know you said like you can't make it, but I just wanted to give you this party favor anyway, because, I still wanted you to be invited, involved and feel like you're there. And he's constantly coming after us. He's constantly like, hey, I'm here and I love you. And, you're always welcome. And like, that's the kind of, but that's how we should be, right? Like, that is how we should be. Like you're saying, Phil, we should be going out. We should be inviting people in. We should be like that constant encouragement. And you're right. We aren't very good at encouraging each other, at lifting one another up. And yes, within the church, calling out sin, holding each other accountable. But that's only within, the church, within the community of believers. Those who say, yes, I do believe, those are the people we hold accountable. Everyone else, we're just called to love. And it doesn't matter how they're living, because they're not held to the same standard that we are. Our first priority, it is just to love them for who they are, where they're at, no matter what. And somewhere in that love, because of our passion for Jesus, we do care about how they're living, and because we care about their soul and their eternity. And I don't think that we take that serious enough. So we just brush off the whole invitation, and we don't care that people don't want to come to the Jesus party. We just move on with our lives, and we should care. We should want everyone there. Isn't that the point? Isn't that the whole point of sharing the gospel? Is like, don't you want to have everyone in heaven? Like, don't we want people to know Jesus? I don't know. Like, I don't know if that's where the church is at. And I guess that's the negativity. But I think it starts with us being more encouraging, being more, just crazy insane for Jesus. The whole, term Jesus freak is because it makes people uncomfortable. But some of like Keith Green, I mean, have you like heard his story and his music? Like, when you listen to his music, you feel his passion for Jesus, and there's joy in that. And I think that when we press deeper into Jesus, the world is going to look at us like we're crazy, and they are probably going to label us a Jesus freak, but we should not care. And because we're so ingrained in him, he is the center of our lives, then we're just so enveloped in this joy and passion for him that we don't care what other people think. And we're like, yeah, well, I'm still going to keep handing out invitations, because you're not going to want to miss this. And I don't care how many times you say no, you're still going to be invited, and I still want you there. And I think we need to do that better.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're hoping to do next week. We're going to talk about, and this will be a great week for you to bring questions and such. And this week, the four of us will continue to keep our ears and our hearts open, because we want to talk next week on what is it that is missed in the call from the church to the world. Because what Kayla's saying is, yeah, those who are outside the church don't live, or cannot be expected to live how Christ is calling the church to live, because maybe they don't even know what that even looks like. And here's the thing is, while Christ is calling us absolutely to love the world, those not apart from the church just yet, he's calling more than anything to love one another within the church. And that, if you've ever been a part of church, I think that's what then causes folks to say, you know what, I'm out. Because within the church, there's such disruption that it's almost easier to go outside the church and say, I'm just going to go love people without any worry about whether or not they're trying to grow in their relationship with Christ. Because then that wrestling that we have to do really does come together. It's not where we come together to learn how together to love others, because to be honest, that's easy. It's coming together to grow spiritually and grow deeper with Christ together that I find harder. Because when we do that, then I have to open up spaces within my life where I am vulnerable with you, where I let you see the down and the dirty and the naked parts that I believe are down and dirty and just filthy. And I think the joy comes, and this is just, maybe I'm just talking completely crazily, but I think the joy comes when I am vulnerable and the most open and the most naked, and I come to realize those who love Jesus, that's when they love me more. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, you don't find me filthy like I've been told by all these other folks? And they're like, what are you talking about? Okay, that's the joy of the church. And until we all get to that point, then we have a lot of work to do, and like what is one of them said to Lucy, you got a lot of explaining to do. I think it's her husband, right? But yeah, the bridegroom is asking the bride, you got a lot of explaining to do. Why is it that we're not love? Okay. And so next week, we want to talk about that. What hinders the church from being the way, the truth, and life of Christ? And so we're stoked that you joined us this week, the first weekend of August, believe it or not. Wow. So we're stoked that the Lord brought us to another Friday, and we're excited for next Friday, and excited for your involvement, and excited for the fact that this week, this day, this moment is yet another moment that the Lord blesses us with to say yes to him, to experience the joy of the Lord our God. And so on behalf of Kayla and Phil and Jim, I'm Matt. This has been another episode of New Wine Uncorked. For those of you that want to get further involved throughout this week, and you are interested because you heard about this whole retreat and the keynote speaker who's not the keynote speaker, check out new-wineskins.org, okay, for their website, or go to Facebook right now, because on there we have the invitation for the retreat as well. And before we leave, Jim's going to give you a couple of words of encouragement for that retreat that he is the keynote speaker at. Oh, okay. He's going to hold those till next week.
No, here, this is what I'll say. The richness of the retreat will be the people that are going to be there. I mean, and a little bit of what we came up, or at least with what the advisory council came up with, was because last year was just a rich time of just connecting with people. We talked about, sitting together with some people I sat with some people I didn't really know, but like Matt, like you said, the vulnerability, people being able to learn to trust. And so, that's what we're building. And so I think the richness will be, be your story, being your story, and how Jesus adds to your story. That'll be the richness of the weekend.
Amen. And so we appreciate that. So head on over to Facebook or to new-wineskins.org for information on the retreat, so you can join us. And this week, though, and today, be looking for those opportunities just to bask in the glory and the love of Jesus Christ, who, for the sake of you, in relationship with you, gave his life so that we, each one of us, could have the abundance of joy and life that we are created for. So till next week, behalf of Kayla and Phil and Jim, I'm Matt. This has been another episode of New Wine